So far, but hopefully everything gets resolved soon, and I just have to vamp for a little bit to get connected with you all. But thank you for joining us at Grace today. My name is Nate Nims, and sorry the sort of pre-service video didn't quite work like it was supposed to. If you can hear me, let me know. That would be helpful. Oh, it looks like we are there. So thank you very much for sticking around, for being with us today. My name is, again, Nate Nims, and it is great to be with you today. So thank you for joining us at Grace Des Moines and for hanging in there and sticking through those small technical difficulties that we had in the background. Excuse me for multitasking while we get started and while people join us for worship. So thank you again for being with us today. We've got a few announcements as we get started, and one of the things to let you know about is our free medical and mental health clinic that is up and running on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday at Grace, starting at 5:30, we have medical and mental health care available for you or for anyone else in need. There is no appointment that is necessary. You just need to be at the church at about 5:30, and we'll be seeing folks till 7:30. We fit in as many guests as we can during that time, and if you're in need of medical care or mental health care, if you've got something that you need to talk through, that is a space and a place where someone is there to listen and to be with you. And if you have some medical concerns, this is a free clinic where you know you can get in between 5:30 and 7:30 on Tuesdays. We are also giving away meal cards with Lucky Horse. Since we can't have meals at the church due to the pandemic and we can't have folks eating in that indoor closed space, we've been working with Lucky Horse to provide meals to our community. So thank you, Lucky Horse, and thank you to those that donated and made those meals possible. Another thing that will be starting back up at the church is our Justice for Our Neighbors legal clinic. Our friends and neighbors in the community that are navigating the immigration and the refugee process work with Justice for Our Neighbors, and Grace is proud to be a host site for those legal clinics. So about once a month moving forward, JFON, Justice for Our Neighbors, will be meeting at the church, and if you would like to help or volunteer, let us know and we will get you connected. Now, this fall season, as we head into Thanksgiving, is often the start of a stewardship campaign for the church, and Grace is beginning our stewardship season now. So before we get the materials out to you, before we really push things, I just have to say how grateful and how thankful I am for you. Our church is able to accomplish great things because of you. Because of your prayers and your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness, we are able to be the church that we are. In the United Methodist Church, prayers, service, gifts, and witness, prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness are the things that we covenant to one another. It's the vow that we make to our church and to one another, that we will support one another and we will support our church with those prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. And while this year has been different, we have done all of those things with one another. And so as we prepare for this pledge season, as you begin to think of what your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness can tangibly look like for our church in 2021 so that we can faithfully and thoughtfully shape a budget together, I just need to say thank you for your support. And there is nothing that I can really do to show you how grateful and how thankful I am. But one thing that we are doing this year, one tangible expression of our gratitude from the church, is that we are going to give you all a mug for pledging to Grace. We are very thankful for all that you do to make Grace the church as it is. We would not be a people called Grace if it was not for you. So to thank you, we're going to give you a tangible mug of grace and peace. I have been laughing to myself, telling myself that I'm going to be so thankful for your giving that I'm going to mug you. And I don't know why I think that's funny, but I can't stop giggling to myself when I think about it. But to thank you for your gifts and your pledges in 2021 as we head into this pledge season, I just want to let you know we are very thankful for your gifts, for the ways that you support our church and one another, and to thank you for your pledges and your support, we're going to give you all a mug. One final announcement is that we will have our Charge Conference for Grace on Thursday, November 12th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Charge Conference is an all-church meeting. It's an annual meeting where we look back at the past year and then we try to look forward to the future and set some goals. And we'll be meeting with our district superintendent, Hee-Chan Jung, and he'll be joining us for this Charge Conference. We'll be sending out the Zoom link to the church through our emails later this weekend. So if you don't get those emails and would like to be included in that meeting, let us know. But everyone is welcome to this Charge Conference if you would like to join us on Thursday the 12th at 7 p.m. With that, we will come together in a time of prayer. And as we said last week, we have to remember to breathe, to slow down and to appreciate this gift and this presence of God's Spirit moving within us, because God is as close to us as we are to our breath. So we'll pause and take a moment to catch our breath, to breathe together, to remember that God is already with us. There is nothing that we have to do to earn or achieve this love. It is simply ours. So take a moment of silence for yourself to rest in this love, and then we will join together in prayer. Let us pray. God, our hope and our comfort, turn our hearts and our feet in the direction of love. Though paths unfold before us promising success or security, give us the courage to ask if they are also paths of love. In Christ, you have shown us what it is to choose each other, to commit to love and to live in compassion among us. Amen. Now we are continuing our series in Paul's prison letter to the Philippians. We have been in this letter since June, and we only have a couple weeks left, and I will grieve when we are done with this letter. I don't know about you, but this letter has really brought me life, so I hope you have enjoyed this series on the letter to the Philippians as much as I have. And if you've missed us, if this is your first Sunday with us at Grace, thank you for being with us. And any of our previous sermons and messages on Philippians you can find at our website or on Facebook or YouTube. But we're coming to a close. Paul is starting to wrap things up in this letter to the Philippians. And so if you have a Bible with you, I'd invite you to open it to Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse 8. Paul writes these words. From now on, siblings in Christ, if anything is excellent and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. All that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise. Practice these things. Whatever you have learned, received, heard, or saw in us, the God of peace will be with you. There is a refrain in our reading today that picks up with some repetition on what we learned and looked at last week. Last week in Paul's letter to the Philippians, Paul writes these words. Be glad in the Lord always. Again I say, be glad. Let your gentleness show in your treatment of all people. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything. Rather, bring up all of your requests to God in your prayers and petitions along with giving thanks. Then the peace of God that exceeds all understanding will keep your hearts and minds safe in Christ Jesus. just below the surface in that passage that we looked at last week and in our reading for today is this reminder to breathe, right? Like Paul lives with this awareness that God is with us. God's love is moving in our midst. God is as close to us as we are to our breath. So Paul is writing about these worries and anxieties, these things that come our way. And Paul says, instead of letting them have the last word, instead of letting them overtake us, rather, remember to breathe. Remember to connect with the holiness and the divinity that is always with us, and God's Spirit will meet us there. The peace of God is with you. Just breathe. Now, sermons should never be therapy for a pastor. In this preaching moment, if the sermon ever becomes about me, I have missed the point. And yet, the very first person that I have to preach to is myself. Because if I can't believe what I'm saying, I can't say it. Now, last week, it was very easy for me to write a sermon for last Sunday about remembering to breathe, about letting go of our worries and anxieties, trusting that God is with us. It will be okay. Just don't worry. Don't let your mind play ping pong. Just take a step back and remember to breathe. That was a really easy sermon to write for last Sunday, but I will be honest. Throughout this whole week, I wish last Sunday I went in a different direction because I was arguing with myself all week long, trying to say to myself, remember, you told other people to breathe. So when you can't sleep at night, when you're checking updates on CNN, NBC News, ABC News, the AP, and every other news service, when you are endlessly scrolling for any update from Nevada, why aren't you remembering to breathe? I now know what people mean when they say something like, that sermon was exactly what I needed to hear. And every now and then, it's really annoying when you know a sermon was just for you and you can't get those words out of your head. I had a hard time remembering to breathe for a while this week. And it's been a year where it feels like a decade since April and 7 months since Tuesday. We have been living with a lot of worries and anxieties and questions. And this last week, I needed to remember to breathe. I had to remind myself of God's presence through all of the roller coaster that we have traveled through. I needed to take a breath, and I am guessing I am not alone in that. Now, even though a few things have been settled since last Sunday, even though we now get a sense of where things are going and what direction we are headed in, we should all remember that an election is never the finish line. It's a starting pistol. It's a beginning. It's a new beginning. It is the start, not the finish. Our work is not done just because an election is over. And whether we like it or not, our nation is always shifting. We are always shifting in one way or another. We do not know how to settle as a people. And I know that as a nation, we are not very good at settling. We are always shifting. We are always pursuing more because KFC created the double down sandwich. If we as a nation were settled, if we were not always trying to achieve something more and something greater, this sandwich would never need to be created, because what other nation would think to themselves, a bacon sandwich is good, but you know what would make it even better? If the bread was fried chicken. And even the double down was not enough. Things were not settled with this sandwich because they went on to create the double down hot dog. Because of course a hot dog bun should be replaced with fried chicken. But even that was not enough because KFC went on to create the mozzarella stick double down chicken sandwich. We are not a people that think enough is enough. We are not settled. We are not slowing down. We are always seeking to achieve more and more and more. And this sandwich, like it or not, is a perfect reflection of how we as a nation just want to reach out and achieve more in different ways. We don't settle because we're a nation of ideals. We're a nation of hopes and of dreams, of wanting to become the justice we believe we were founded for. We keep striving to be a more perfect union. We are on the move. We don't settle. We keep striving forward. So whatever social reality we are entering into, however we continue to shift as a nation, elections will not decide our future alone. Elections matter. Elections shape policies and political ramifications, and that matters because those policies and those strategies affect real people and real lives and real families and real communities. As Christians, we should see our vote as an extension of how we seek to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But compared to actually loving our neighbors, voting is easy. Voting is so easy that we can sometimes tell ourselves, I voted, I did my job, now they have to do their job, and I'll just sit back and relax. I really assumed that we would not know anything over this weekend because as a nation, we have been holding our breath every time we've gone out the front door for the past 8 months. So why wouldn't we just hold our breath for one more weekend? I didn't think we would know anything, but since we can breathe, since we can at the very least sigh, as the poet Andrea Gibson wrote, perhaps our sighs might build on themselves into a tornado tearing through every structure of hate. We can sigh, we can breathe, and we can do the work of tearing down those structures of division and hate that continue to separate us because we, as followers of Christ, have to work towards loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. Jesus asks us to follow, to be engaged in this work of tangibly caring for and embettering our communities as we live out this love of God and this justice and joy with one another. Now, in our reading last week, we looked at Paul saying, "Let your gentleness be shown in your treatment of all people." And that word in Greek for gentleness is forbearance as well. It's a word that means you respond with grace or you respond with mercy in a moment when retaliation or revenge is expected. Paul writes that our gentleness, that our forbearance, that our grace should be shown in our treatment of all people. And then as anxieties come our way, as worries and fears and frustrations come to us, rather than letting them define us, rather than just letting them play ping pong in our heads, rather than thinking that our anxieties or worries or fears will define us, Paul writes, take a breath, bring this to God, connect with the Spirit that is as close to you as you are to your breath. Remember to breathe. And in those spaces of prayer, of contemplation, of connection with the holiness that is within us and all around us, it is in that space where Paul says we will be kept safe in the peace of God. And that's the refrain that is repeated in our reading from last week and this week. This insistence that the peace of God is with us. So Paul writes in what we are looking at today, from now on, siblings in Christ, If anything is excellent and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. All that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise, practice these things. Whatever you learned, received, heard, or saw in us, God will be with you. Now, sometimes the Bible is very nuanced in pointing out different things. There's a whole host of references and pointing to other passages that goes on in the scriptures. We've seen this throughout the letter to the Philippians, that this word is actually a reference to that story, and to understand we have to fit everything together. There's a whole host of passages that are filled with that sort of complexity and nuance and winks and hints. But every now and then, the Bible is just very blunt and direct, and sometimes it repeats itself just to make sure that if you missed it the first time, it hits you in the head the second time. The peace of God, which exceeds all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds safe, and the God of peace will be with you. That is repeated not once but twice in quick succession. We are told the God of peace will be with you. And more than that, in this passage from Paul, we read where we meet this God of peace, where we find this peace, where we, if we catch our breath, can notice and see how the God of peace is with us. Because if anything is excellent, if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. All that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise, practice these things. It is in this practice of excellence, of love, of truth, of admiration. It is in the centering of ourselves in these spaces and places that the God of peace is with us and we are with God. Now, this repetition of saying the God of peace will guard your hearts and minds and the God of peace will be with you, it reminds me of the letter to 1 John. 1 John, beginning in chapter 4, verse 8, says this: "The person who doesn't love God does not know God, because God is love. This is how the love of God is revealed to us. God sent God's only Son into the world so that we can live through Christ." Dear friends, if God loved us this way, we also ought to love each other. No one has ever seen God. If we love each other, God remains in us, and God's love is made perfect in us. This is how we remain in God's love, and God is made perfect in us, because God has given us a measure of God's Spirit. We have known and have believed the love that God has for us. God is love. And those who remain in love remain in God, and God remains in them. So not once, but twice, just in case you missed it the first time around, it is written, God is love. What they do not write is God is loving. What they do not write is that God is a lot like love. It is written bluntly and directly. God is love. In unequivocal terms, in case you missed it the first time, you cannot miss it the second time. God is love, so remain in this love. Let this love be made perfect in you, so that you can focus on all that is admirable, all that is excellent, all that is pure, all that is lovely, all that fills us and brings us to this peace and this grace that we can rest in, that we can give to ourselves and to one another. Not once, but twice, it is written right in a row, God is love. And then it is written not once, but twice in a row, the peace that exceeds all understanding will guard your hearts and minds. The God of peace will be with you. We don't have to ask if God is with us. We don't have to wonder, even in moments of fear or anxiety or uncertainty, if God is with us, because when we can take a breath, even in those moments of worries and frustration and fear, God is love, and love is all around. So if God is love, if God is peace, we don't have to wonder if God is with us, but we should stop and ask ourselves, we should wonder, are we with God? That's the question. We don't have to wonder, we don't have to ask ourselves if God is with us. God is present. But we should ask ourselves, are we present? Are we with love? Are we with peace? If God is with us, are we truly connecting and moving in the direction that God calls us to? The biblical scholar Justin Tanis writes in his commentary on the book of Philippians in the Queer Bible Commentary that these words to the Philippians are also a prayer, that love grows in the way in which it is a result of love continuing to mature. Love becomes more than knowledge when we practice it. When we can live out the love we have in increasing ways, expanding our sense of compassion, faith, and commitment to community. We can love people by knowing more and more about them, not just the superficial aspects of those we meet, but loving them more fully as we encounter the quirks, the insecurities, the brilliance, and the passion in others. Those words from Justin in the Queer Bible Commentary and this study of Philippians there, those words, it is also a prayer that love grows and that the ways in which we live as a result of love will continue to mature. Those words stuck with me this week. Because of course, love is with us. Of course, the God of peace is with us, just like this God is with everyone else. The question is not, is God with us? The question is, does this love mature within us? Does this love become more than knowledge as we seek to work alongside with this love? Paul writes, if anything is excellent, if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things. As I've been thinking about the love and the peace that God is, I know this is weird, but I have been thinking about a cheese grater. Because there is a certain direction that you can move your hand on this cheese grater without getting worried, right? Like if you move a certain way, you won't get hurt. You'll feel the grooves, but you don't have to be worried about them. You can trust that your hand will be okay. But if we choose to move in the opposite direction, things might get a little complicated and messy, and we will get hurt. If God is with us, we can move in a certain direction. If God is love, if God is peace, we have to ask ourselves, are we living in the direction of this love? Are we joining God in the movement of this peace? Are we focusing on all that is excellent, on anything that is admirable? Are we living into this love for ourselves and extending it to one another? Not just knowing it, not just appreciating it, but focusing on it so that we can be filled with this presence of God that is found in peace and love so that we might overflow and extend it to others. Now, this Greek word for excellent is aret. Now, erit in the first century was used to describe good moral character, virtue. It's the word where if you think of character counts, that campaign that is going on in schools to remind students that this is who good people are. These are the virtues, these are the characteristics that make us good neighbors and good students, right? Erit is excellent. It's a word for character or ethics or virtues. And then the word for admirable in Greek is euphema, which means kind-spirited. It means good-willed. It means being gracious or kind to others. Now, in the Roman Empire, being excellent or being admirable, living as a person of character, living as a person with ethics and virtues and truth-telling and honesty and compassion, having a good will towards one another, these were seen in the Roman Empire as the characteristics of a good citizen. For good reason. Good people live with character and virtue and goodwill and compassion. Right? So there are a whole host of philosophical and political writers throughout the ancient world that wrote about these words. And what is really fascinating is that Paul takes these two primary understandings of what makes a Roman citizen a citizen. And Paul says we should focus on that. And this is not Paul flipping the script. This is not Paul taking the language of the empire and those propaganda slogans and saying to himself, you think it means that, but it really means this. Paul is saying, no, we're on to something here. There are virtues and there are characteristics that across the board we know are good and valued and virtuous. Paul lifts up these virtues that everyone in the Roman Empire thought were good and valued because, of course, they are good and valued. The scholar Gordon Fee writes in his commentary to the Philippians that Paul is encouraging the Philippians to embrace what is good wherever they find it, including in the culture with which they are most intimately familiar, but to do so in a discriminating way. The scholar Elsa Tamez puts her own spin on this understanding of Paul's letter to the Philippians when she writes in her commentary that when our thoughts are free of anxieties and concerns, minds are liberated and people are good and to behave in ways worthy of the gospel. Doing good is a very abstract concept. But when combined with behavior that is worthy of the gospel, good is transcended into the ethics of justice and care for one another. It is not just being a good person for the sake of being a good person or being a good citizen. It is joining in this movement, this expansion of the love that we know God is, this sharing and overflowing of the peace that will guard our hearts and minds, and the God of peace being with us. It is letting this love mature, as it isn't just something in our heads, but it is the way that we treat one another, even with our quirks and insecurities. Biblical scholarship across the board points to a hope with Paul's words, that we might see whatever is excellent and whatever is admirable wherever it is, as a sign of God's grace and peace among us. That whatever is excellent, whatever is loving, whatever is pure, wherever it is a sign and a symbol of God's hope and love being with us, so that we might be with that as one another. So in the days ahead, this is our work, church. As faithful followers of Jesus, we need to notice and we need to identify and we need to celebrate whatever is excellent and whatever is admirable, whatever is neighborly, whatever is hopeful, whatever is loving, and whatever is peaceful. Notice it. Identify it, celebrate it, share it, pass it on, encourage others to join you in cherishing this excellence and this admirability wherever it is. We need to join in this commitment to meet God in those places, because God is love. The God of peace is with you. So will we join God in the movement of that love wherever we see it and however we find it. God is making all things new, and so we join in this work by pointing out, by identifying, by celebrating all that is excellent, all that is admirable, all that is loving, wherever we find it. I asked on Facebook this week where folks were seeing this, and one person wrote to me about their great niece putting on some jewelry. They were playing dress up. This little girl was putting on some fancy clothes, and then she put on some jewelry that had been handed down through the family. And the niece said this was given to her by her great-great-great-great-grandma. And seeing that family continue to share gifts and grace with one another, that is excellent, that is admirable, that is loving. Another person wrote to me about how they were out for a run with their son. She was out running with her son, and around one block, he reached up and grabbed her hand. And running is not easy, and holding hands does not make it easier, but it does help. And so they ran, holding hands together, and this 8-year-old son said to his mother, "Your hand's colder than mine. Mine's warmer than yours." They had this conversation about the feeling of holding hands as they continued to hold hands and run together. Holding hands is such a small gesture, but it can create a world of difference. We can have those small moments that are excellent and admirable and pure and loving and holy. And when we have them, we need to notice them, we need to cherish them, and we need to share them because God is there. Another person told me about how they drove out of the city to walk the trails in nature. That walking through the city is fine, but when you go and you find yourself surrounded by nature, when you have that reset and can appreciate the simple gifts that is this world that we so cherish and need to care for, that is excellent, that is admirable, that is pure, that is lovely. And God is found in those spaces and those places, in that beauty that we can be a part of. Our focus, even now, as much as it will continue to be a story, our focus cannot be on the election alone. As much as elections matter, as much as it will shape our life together, as much as we should see our participation in this process as an extension of our mission as followers of Christ to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Our focus cannot be on the election alone. The grace and peace that holds us together, the love, the ways that we need to embrace one another, all that holds together our friendships and our families and our communities, it cannot be reduced to a vote because our lives are not like an episode of Survivor. We do not get to vote one another off the island. We can't simply say, "I am done with you. We voted. We're moving on. Get over it." We have to. If God is love, if God is peace, we have to ask ourselves, are we living with this peace? Are we extending this love? If God is with us, will we move to where God is? Will we notice? Will we focus on all that is excellent, all that is admirable wherever we find it, and join with God in this movement of grace and peace, in following Christ and seeking to love one another with the fullness of ourselves, with the fierceness that comes from seeking mercy and justice and joy for everyone. God is love. The peace of God will guard your hearts and minds, and the God of peace will be with you. It is the work of our faith to attest to what is excellent and what is admirable, to share that, to celebrate that, to know where God is moving because we can see that movement amongst us. We get to join God in this reconciliation of all things, to be a part of the love that rises above conservative talking points and liberal agendas. We get to be a part of this love that lifts the tide, that holds us all together, because we can be this peace and this love with and for one another. For Paul, focusing though, it's not enough. We need to acknowledge, we need to point out, we need to celebrate, but it is not enough to simply know what is admirable or excellent and have our focus there. We have to focus on it. And focus is logize, I think. I honestly have no idea exactly how to say that in Greek, but it looks like logize to me. Now you can see how our word for logic comes from this word. In Greek, this word can be broken down to mean reasoning to a decision. It can mean coming to your final place. It means reaching the bottom line. That's how a few scholars translated this word for focus. It is reaching the bottom line, that place where you can no further go. Have you ever wondered, or have you ever asked yourself where you will go, but you will go no further? What is your bottom line? The hope that Paul has for the Philippians, and I believe the hope that Paul has us, isn't simply that we can acknowledge what is admirable or excellent or true or holy or worthy of praise, but that can be our bottom line. This is where we can go no further from. This is who we are. What is excellent, what is admirable, what is loving, what is pure, what is true. Some of you know that at Grace, we recently added a second elevator to our facility. Our building, even though we can't be there as we wish we could be, it is more accessible. And now we have a ground floor that can rise us up in a new way. I know that we're not back at the building, but I can't thank you enough for putting that together, making our facility more accessible and more welcoming to all people. Thinking about that elevator, I started to wonder, what's our ground floor? When it comes to how we treat one another, when it comes to even how we treat ourselves, what is the ground floor for you? Only rise